Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining me today on J Slay, Made in the USA, where we explore truth, expose deception, and inspire courage. Guys, we're going to have a more political show than I've been doing lately. And right now, the internet, especially in the alt media, is all abuzz right now with Donald Trump's appointments, his cabinet selections. We're going to get into that today. We're going to get into what's going on in the Middle East a little bit. But before we go there, the man that I have on today is the Captain Seth Keshel. And if you don't know who he is, he's a return guest. He's a friend of mine. He's a former Army captain in military intelligence and an Afghanistan veteran. He first gained national recognition in 2016 for accurately predicting the outcome of the Electoral College in the Clinton-Trump election. His analytical methods quickly came to prominence and notoriety nationwide, including from Donald Trump, as he later investigated voting irregularities in the 2020 election. And then in 2024, he achieved the remarkable milestone again by predicting accurately the entire Electoral College results, which, as he says, becuckled the mainstream media. So with that, Seth Keshel, thanks for coming on today.
All right, Jeremy. Well, it's good to be back on. We've done a lot of great shows in the past 3 years, and I'm sure that this one is going to touch on a lot of important stuff. So looking forward to getting after it with you.
No doubt, brother. Well, before we go forward, tell us a little bit about your analytical method, and were you confident going into this time? I mean, it's just amazing that you were able to do what you did with calling all of these states accurately. I think you said 56.
Well, there's 56 different contests for electoral votes, and you got the 50 states in Washington D.C. And plus the 5 split electoral votes of Nebraska and Maine. And that's 56. And I called the race at 312 for Trump and 226 for Harris. I made my final prediction the morning of the election, and I put it on Substack. So, I mean, that's time stamped. And I was really solid on most of it. The only few states that I was really in question about were based mostly on my beliefs of the capabilities of the cheat. And the two most likely to be defrauded states in the field of swing states were Michigan and Georgia, and largely because of the quality of the voter roll, meaning it's not high quality. It's the automatic voter registration. And then you've got New Hampshire, which to me was one of the more true toss-up states. The registration data gave a window for Trump to carry the state by less than a point. And I wound up leaning it to Harris based on a variety of factors. One of them, candidate behavior, Trump really not going after it. So I called them 8 battlegrounds, 7 decisive plus North Carolina. And I had all of those for Trump except New Hampshire, which I call correct. And then I split Nebraska's 2nd congressional district, the 1 electoral vote, leaned that to Harris. That went to Harris by about 3 points. And then we had the split votes in Maine, which Northern District 2 went to Trump, District 1 in the South went to Harris, and the state was Harris plus 6. So it was fun with the New York Times having written an entire hit piece dedicated to me.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the quotes in there from a guy named Logan Phillips was, if he manages to get any of these right, it will likely be because of luck.
Right. Let's pull up one of these quotes real quick. I've got one here.
You're dug in against Justin Verlander, and you're down 0-2, and you run into one, and it was because of luck, right?
Sure, yeah. Well, they're going to say what they're going to say, but here's what they wrote about you. This is one I picked out. Election deniers like Mr. Keshel have spent 4 years since Mr. Trump's electoral defeat in 2020, blaming the loss on a conspiracy theory involving voter fraud conducted through mail-in voting, ballot harvesting, and automatic voter registration. They continue to push the idea, even though courts and election officials have repeatedly refuted and dismissed the claims. In truth, voting fraud in the United States is extremely rare. So I'd like you to respond to that.
It's not rare. It's just hard to prove. And, you can liken it to different things and make it make sense to people. So if you're there in Nashville, Tennessee, and you send a salesman up the road to Louisville, Kentucky, well, you're going to expect, and it's just one night, you're going to get an expense bill back, and you're going to probably you might give him 2 tanks of gas if you're feeling generous and in and around mileage, a night in a Marriott for $200, and then food. And you're going to think you're going to get an expense bill somewhere in the $500 or $600 range. And then we've got the $2,800 expense bill that comes in. Well, I don't know if you cleared him for a massive dinner with customers, but if this is the pattern, I don't even know how much of an investigation you need to launch to be able to see that something's not right with the record. So the 2020 election data showed me that these gains are not organic, they're not natural, they're never before seen. They come for a candidate who did not campaign. And they also, on the other side, Donald Trump had massive gains in votes. There's some counties
Right.
in the 2024 election where Trump doesn't have his 2020 vote total.
It's
So
amazing.
Trump's right. So Trump's turnout in 2020 was enormous. Now, either all totals in the election are completely fake, and now they're just starting to reconcile, which I don't think that's the case. But I think that the 2024 data shows us a lot of clues about what the true capabilities of the electoral fraud equation are. I think that we've had some confirm and denies on what the methodology is, including with electronic voting fraud. So with the numbers like they are, they speak for themselves. But voting fraud is not rare. In fact, some of the federal agencies like the FBI have busted voter fraud rings in blue states, and they're willing to go after Democrats defrauding Democrats in Democrat primaries. And they've shown the methodology of this, and I've written it up. People requesting mail-in ballots on behalf of people, having a form signed saying, I want my ballot being sold. And a few hundred ballots of this form. So if you've got 10 guys that are dedicated to collecting 30 ballots apiece, then you can collect enough fraudulent ballots to tip a city council race. And that's what's been exposed. People are not willing to go after governor's races or Senate races or presidential races because the ramifications globally are massive. Now, I don't know if that will always be the case. I believe that the Trump election was largely clean throughout most of the map, at least as far as aligned with normal trends, indicators, and bellwethers and predictors.
But
I
did
think
your analysis take into account what you thought would be fraudulent activity? Like you took that into account to make the prediction you did?
yes, the capabilities of the cheat and how big the
Okay.
counties are that are most likely to be cheated. Some of the states have voter roll purges, but I believe that the fraud in the 2024 election was targeted downrange, down ballot. And I obviously think that this has hurt Trump's margins. I'm not looking at any states where I think Trump should have won that state this year. Maybe a state like Minnesota, if you back away all of the cheats that they've put into law. The problem with a lot of the election fraud is it's lawful with the way that the states have put it in. I don't think
Okay.
it's constitutional and should hold up. But down ballot, at least 3, if not 4 Senate seats got ripped off. We're looking at Wisconsin, Nevada, Michigan, Arizona. And that, because we're going to get into cabinet picks later on in the show, and that is one of the key factors for the current picks if you're not happy with the picks. But Trump's election, a lot of the states are relaxed. The cheating is relaxed. And I think that when there was the narrative that went out a few weeks before the election that Harris would win the Electoral College but lose the popular vote, that was a hint that, hey, we can't have her sitting on 89 million votes this time around.
Right. Yeah.
It's going to have to be a skinny fix.
Was there anyone else that you know of that made the prediction to the accuracy level that you did this time around?
Yeah, there were a few people on election Twitter that had a 312 to 226 map, and it's still a good, it's a good prediction. It's a feather in the cap. A lot of the states are extremely predictable. So you've got 37 states, in my opinion. If you can't call 37 of the states red or blue reliably, and that is factoring in the current laws and state of elections. If you can't call 37 of these states accurately, you really shouldn't be picking elections. And then you've got another 6 or 7 states that you can usually peg them. Like, give you an example, North Carolina. North Carolina is almost always won by the Republican at the presidential level in modern history. So
Mm-hmm.
Jimmy Carter won it in 1976, and then Obama won it in '08 by an eyelash. And it's been Republican every other time, including in the 2020 year. So that's an example of a state I would call a leaner, where it's not a 15-point Texas style beating, but it's reliably tough to get. So if you can't call most of those, then you shouldn't be predicting elections. And then you get into the tougher states, and a few of them are really tough, but they vote together. Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin tend to vote together. The last time they did not all vote for the same candidate was in 1988.
Yeah.
And that was when Wisconsin broke off for Dukakis, but Bush 41 held Wisconsin or Michigan and Pennsylvania from Reagan's coalition. But those states tend to roll together. And then you have Arizona and Nevada, where if they're Republican, they roll together. So Nevada's never voted Republican for president with Arizona blue. So when it became clear to me through the registration and analysis that Trump was going, and the early vote, that Trump was going to win Nevada, then
Mm-hmm.
Arizona is on ice. I was watching Duval County, Florida voter registration and early vote stats for Georgia because Duval County, Florida, which is Jacksonville, is a perfect mirror for Georgia for the last 2 decades. So this is the way I unraveled this nonsense like I did in 2016.
You know, as you talk about these things with the memory of the counties and the voter rolls and registrations, your mind works so differently than mine does. I mean, I would never be able to remember this stuff. Maybe I could if I studied it all the time. But what kind of notoriety has this brought to you? Before we move on to other topics, I know that based on what you did in 2016 and then the analysis you were providing in 2020, you caught the eye of like Rudy Giuliani's team and gosh, who else? Like Sidney Powell and others were using your analysis. This time around, it's got to be raising some eyebrows beyond just cartoonists doing stuff like this. But that has to be making waves when the New York Times is writing pieces about you, trying to debunk you, and you end up debunking them.
It's fun. The New York Times piece was not involuntary. Stuart Thompson is the guy that wrote the article, and he has written a few things about me in the past, and they weren't so great. But I've never been one to not talk to the mainstream media because this is one thing I think the military prepared me for. A lot of people are afraid. And a funny story in one of Lindell's events in 2023 down in Springfield, Missouri, he had a summit in Springfield in 22 and in 23. There was the Sioux Falls one in 2021.
Mm-hmm.
And they've run their course. But we had the New York Times there. The press is allowed in these events, and the New York Times was at the Springfield event in 2023. And you can look her up maybe when you publish the show. There's a reporter that is, or at least was, assigned to cover election denialism, you could say.
Right.
And her name is Alexandra Bergeon. And she's a pretty nice lady, but she obviously doesn't agree with us. And she would walk around and try to hear sidebar chatter to see if she could write it up, which of course is something that's dangerous if you've got a reporter who's not ethical. I'm not saying she's not, but she pulled out a pen and pad, and I said, "Hey, Alexandra, how you doing?" And she wanted to get my opinion about the event. Well, the way that I approach the mainstream media about this stuff, and this is learned of several years of speaking in public a lot, and in the military intelligence world or in the Army world, they have this thing called need to know. So you just you tell them things that you can't hang yourself on, where you're not going to get in trouble. You're not going to be trashing somebody. You're not going to be throwing somebody's methodology under the bus. So what I typically do with the media is I give them so much information that they can either choose to print it and convince other people that, hey, this guy actually is smart. You ought to look into this because it's factual. You can go look it up and I'm going to be correct. The only thing that there is to disagree on is if you think I'm a kook and my proprietary methods are just nonsense. But I can usually show that very clearly. Or they opt to delete it. And so that's what happened is nothing got printed from what I said in 2023, but everybody was in there trying to pull it away and make sure I didn't talk. But Thompson reached out to me in, I want to say September, and he asked questions about your method. And I read his email, and what he was wanting was to talk or to do a Zoom and talk about this. And, you got some people are like, well, they're just trying to dig intel to see where they need to fraud the election out. But I don't agree with that. I put all my research online for more than 3 years. So I agree to do a Zoom with Stu. He's a nice enough guy. Doesn't agree with us, but we did the interview, and I wanted to get my stuff on record. I was willing to take the risk that this was going to be another ripped off election. And I was going to be sitting there with a 312, 226 prediction that went to hell. But I didn't. I wound up calling it right. So now I have noticed that nobody's been able to go after me. Nobody's been able to trash me or my work because clearly I've got a pretty good handle on what's going on with these shifts. So our elections are made up of real votes for all candidates and fake votes. The challenge is finding out the fake counterfeit votes, where they are, where they come from, how they come, and how they can be eliminated. And this 24 election, regardless of how much fakery is involved in it, is extremely valuable because it cross-references of 2016, 2020, and now itself. So I can start making maps and looking at these changes and see what's up for the rest of the decade. And there is an easy path for Republican Senate majorities and the Electoral College in 2028 if we can make some very small adjustments to about 7 or 10 states. So when you're looking at this like a baseball player would, well, I would like to have a perfect swing, and I'd like to be able to respond to an off-speed pitch when I was sitting fastball. I'd like to be able to get around on an inside fastball, But I'll make this small adjustment here that's going to fix my timing problem. I might put a tap in and fix my hitch, and that'll get me through this game and get me back in the rhythm, and then we'll fix it all. So our
Sure.
hitch, our timing adjustment here is some small changes in 10 states that I identified. It's the 7 battleground states plus a few that Trump pulled delightfully close: New York, Illinois, and New Jersey. So, or Virginia, I should say, instead of New York, but Virginia, New Jersey, and Illinois. And if we can start hammering at those, we got 3 potential flips within the next 8 years, and then we've got secure electoral college, because all that stuff is trending towards us.
Okay. Man, that's a lot of info and really good info. With your military background, let's switch gears toward now that Trump is in office, and there's definitely a fracturing on the conservative right between those who are just going to, praise Trump no matter what. They're excited no matter what. And even no matter what he does or who he appoints, they'll take a posture of trying to protect, their investment because they've invested a lot of time and energy. And I'm even one of those, Seth, that has pushed for Trump hard, fought for him, given speeches, everything. But with time, I've become a little more leery. And then, after the assassination attempt, I kind of knew he's going to be elected. That was what made me think this is going to happen. And I think what we're seeing is a lot of right-wing people are just so tired of being let down, so tired of being told, promises, which is typical of politicians. But Trump's always seemed different. Like this might be a guy that could really keep his promises. And then these appointees, in my opinion, are a very mixed bag. And on the one hand, we could say about all of them, they're all extremely pro-Zionist. So people land in all different camps on how they feel about that. If you don't mind, Seth, I know I've just thrown out a lot there. I've got a short video I want to play from Colonel Douglas McGregor, who was on my friend's show, Paul Harrell. And let's listen for 2 or 3 minutes to what he had to say about Trump, personnel, and foreign policy. And then let's start by responding to that, if you don't mind.
But the problem in the Middle East is very different because we're not in charge in the Middle East. Mr. Netanyahu is in charge. He has more influence and control over the United States Armed Forces right now than our own government. And he is hell-bent to go to war with Iran. He sees Iran as the key to everything in the region that's wrong. If he can destroy Iran, bring down the government, demolish the place, somehow or another, all of Israel's problems will vanish. That's not true. In fact, things will get much worse. And there are thousands and thousands of Russians on the ground in Iran right now. They have helped to hastily establish an effective air and missile defense structure. At least it looks like it will be effective. They brought in additional armaments and munitions with Iran in the event that we attack Iran. And right now, that's the real reason for all the carrier battle groups and the air power that we've assembled, 1,000 fighter jets, and the bombers that we've moved to Diego Garcia and to other places in Europe. It's all designed to attack Iran. And there are lots of people in Washington, as you pointed out, that are very excited at the prospect of attacking Iran without understanding the larger strategic implications. And those are very straightforward, that the Russians will come in and they will not allow Iran to be destroyed. And I would argue that increasingly it looks like the Turks, who are certainly no friends of the Iranians, will likely also come in because of what's happening in Lebanon. And behind them both stand China. The Chinese are absolutely not going to allow Iran to be destroyed either. They're heavily dependent upon the oil and natural gas that flows out of the Persian Gulf. So they will react very negatively. And behind them, there are another 84 countries in the world that are lining up to join BRICS, which is this alternative economic community, if you will, that will have its own trade relations, its own commerce, its own gold, silver backed currency, probably with other commodities. And we are on the edge of the abyss. We're staring into disaster. War is not a cure for what ails us. War will destroy us. And we need to understand that. Meantime, no one in Washington.
So I'll stop it right there, Seth. The way I want to open this up is I could read down the list of all the appointees, regardless of whether it's Pam Bondi or Secretary of Labor or any of them. It doesn't matter. The one thing I do know is they're all saying we support Israel unconditionally, no matter what. I've heard no other messaging except for maybe Matt Gaetz, who dropped out. He wasn't as gung-ho about that whole thing. So based on what Douglas McGregor said, which I don't know, I didn't tell you I was going to play that. That's somebody I do respect when it comes to foreign policy, and what we're seeing in these cabinet picks. What are your thoughts? What's your take?
Oh, we've talked about this before. This is one of the diciest topics in all of alt politics. So people that are willing to think outside the box. So I don't talk, it's not conservative politics. This is a topic where you've been told that this is how foreign policy is for all of time. And it's not. So I think that every nation has its own good people, and I think every nation has its own deep state, so to speak.
Sure.
And I don't really even like the term deep state, not any more than I like the term conservative. It's a bureaucracy. It exists to preserve and protect itself. It's like a cancer, and it feeds itself, it grows itself, and any reduction in itself is a threat that it is going to eventually go away. So when you look at states like Maryland or Virginia electorally, and you look at the trends, well, Maryland has a massively Republican outer ring outside of the Baltimore area and outside of the DC area. It's all Appalachia out in the west, and it's the coastal Atlantic on the east. And the same thing is true of Virginia. Once you get 40 miles outside of Washington, D.C., you're in a very red state. But the people that live there are dependent on the growth of the federal government. And some of that is related to our foreign policy and our defense. So I do not support any other country except for the United States. And that includes Iran, and that includes Israel, that includes Russia, that includes the United Kingdom, it includes all the Five Eyes.
Right.
And so that's not that I think that we need to become enemies with any nation. I just think that all nations should be responsible for their own military defense. I think all nations should protect their own borders. So why is the United States defending Ukraine and Israel's borders? I don't think that that's our job. I think it's our job to defend our own borders. Why are we sending $96 billion to other nations for defense? Why? I think it's because of bribery. And I think that that's probably getting kicked back to our politicians, who supposedly make $174,000 a year to live in one of the most expensive markets to live in the United States. So something there is not adding up to me.
One other thing, just real quick, Seth, and actually go ahead with your thought there. I shouldn't have cut you off. Go ahead.
So I think that this escalation across the world involving many nations, Russia, Iran, Ukraine, Israel, I think that's being driven by internal bureaucratic administrative states, deep states. And I think that this escalation is designed, now that Trump couldn't have been stopped electorally, I think that's been designed to create a speed bump and a problem for him to have to navigate over the next 4 years. And there are a lot of people that I respect who think that things are going to be very bad when Trump takes office in terms of the military state of the world. I would like to think that that's not correct, but war has been one of the most constant things throughout all of human history.
Yeah.
So I've got one eye open when it comes to this, and that also means with discerning who's good and who's bad in this.
I feel comfortable asking you this question because of what you offered to everyone publicly on my last show. The big problem here for me, regardless of what anybody else has asked me to ask you today, is this. I know, based on all the research I've done, and you said point blank on my last show, you feel like October 7th, what happened over there to start this whole engine of war for 13 to 14 months now, was based on a false flag that Israel knew was coming. I mean, you said it. You said, I don't think it. I know it. There's not one politician, including Trump, on that list of cabinet picks, again, including Trump or the VP pick, J.D. Vance, that would ever even come close to admitting that. And yet to us, it's so obvious that the Israeli army was told to stand down, et cetera. So it makes that much more of a punch in the face to the American people and our tax dollars when the common guys on the street, like you, you're not a common guy, but I am, can just see this. There's so many people that just see it, yet we're being told, well, we got to support Israel unconditionally. I mean, at least Stephanak's like, give them what they want when they need it, no questions, bar none. And it's just like, has anybody told you that they let this happen in order to have a land grab in a war that they've wanted for a long time?
So no one has told me that directly. I like to call balls and strikes fairly, to use another baseball lean in. So we do know that people, I don't remember which agency it was. I'd have to go look. But I know that Israeli intelligence knew there was going to be an attack, or there was a threat of an attack, or they had all the pieces together that this was an attack that was going to happen.
Yes.
All right. So to me, all analysis about alliances stops right there. And That's the question is why. And like people that don't want to believe that, what they do is they get stuck in divisions over religion or divisions over ethnicity, divisions over nationalities. That's what's going on here is people, just like in US politics, where somebody that's a lifelong Republican or a lifelong Democrat will not call the balls and strikes the way they are. So you don't have to be an anti-Semite or anything, somebody who's bigoted or prejudiced towards anyone, to look at what this is. Did someone know about this on October 7th? And if the answer is yes, then why was nothing done? All right. Then furthermore, look at our own country. We have proof from 2019 and 2020 through emails and FOIA requests that the federal government knew a lot more about the research into COVID-19 than they've let. I think we call this the gain of function research. And we know about this, and then all of a sudden, here comes this virus sweeping in to our country in March of 2020. And we've got a presidential election that just so happens to be right around the corner. Now, for March, it's not 8 months until the presidential election. It's more like 4, when both parties have their nominees in place, and then the campaign begins, and then early voting begins. So with about 4 months of notice, here's some rule changes that are going to be in place. One party is expert at this because they perfected it in California, and the other one is not trusting of the system, for good reason. And good luck. Hope you get it all done. And that's how the 2020 election was ripped off. So people that want to look at this black and white, I tell everybody, if you ever get into the subject and somebody wants to call you a racist, a bigot, an anti-Semite, or anything else, look, I support the basic rights of all men, regardless of traits that they cannot change or traits that they choose. Right. So I support free speech for all religions. I support the freedom of assembly to gather for all religions, for all people of all colors, races, creeds, ethnicities, and tribes. So that's something that just doesn't fly with me. I'm looking at this from a sheerly military perspective, and the governments of the world are hell-bent on creating military catastrophe. And that is one thing. So you mentioned the Trump administration. He has politics to navigate, and we're going to get into that with the cabinet picks. But at the same time, he is hated by the defense industry and contractors that tossed him out because he was the first president in so long to not start any new wars. And some of his cabinet picks are excellent choices for furthering that, even if people don't want to see them because they're focused on a few.
For furthering what?
For furthering Trump's goals of no new wars and using the military for just purposes, for good reasons.
I sure hope you're right on that. It does appear to me that the majority of them would, at the drop of a hat, that may be unfair to say, but if they're told that Israel's in danger in any way, they'll go to war. I mean, that's how it seems to appear to me.
The same is true of Ukraine, and many other countries that seem to have fallen under a banner of protection. But at the same time, like I said, I am for peace across the world of all nations. And I am also of the mind that I want all nations to figure out their own problems, separate from causing United States soldiers to die for those countries. I don't care what country it is. And I think that even getting involved in wars for true allies, which I don't know that we have any true allies, I think that even that is a worst case scenario. I don't know that the United States has fought a just war since maybe World War II. I don't go as far to get into all the conspiracies on World War II, even though there's look at our own intelligence in Pearl Harbor. There's pretty credible evidence that Roosevelt knew Pearl Harbor was going to be attacked.
Yeah.
And that's something that when you look down at the granular intelligence that was happening out in the Pacific theater, that it was on their radar. It was one of the bigger intelligence misses of World War II. But what I'm saying is that has nothing to do with anti-anybody, racism, anti-Semitism. So that's just common sense. So I ask everybody to make their assessments about foreign policy free of religion, ethnicity, nationality.
But the problem is, based on what you said, like anything we're saying, and I know why you're saying it, because it immediately brings to mind the whole anti-Semitism word. But the thing is, like all of these people that are cabinet picks, except for Gates, were on board with HB 6020, which is the whole Anti-Semitism Awareness Act, which it allows for some special interest group to define what anti-Semitism is, which includes anti-Zionism. Gates wasn't on board with it. I'm not saying it's the only reason he's out, but it surely contributed, in my opinion. So it appears to me that the cabinet picks are not getting what you're saying.
Well, the lobbyists control too much of the government in every aspect. And I can just tell you that from a state level perspective, being married to a state representative here in Arizona has nothing to do with foreign policy. But if you are not a yes on all the pet projects, you do not get the money. So we had many events in this election. So Rachel won re-election, by the way, here in LD 17. So she's returning to the Arizona Freedom Caucus in the House here in 2025-26 term. But we had many events around the Tucson area where it was intended by a lot of well-heeled people that have a lot of money. And there were times where the candidates in the LD 17 Freedom Caucus, 3 of them at one point, would have no more than $500 in checks when they left the fundraiser, which that's not enough to do much of anything. It's a $10,000 expense for a team of 2 to send out mailers. So that's before we talk about radio ads or television ads, which were completely out of the question for us. So we have a government that's dependent on lobbyists to shower them with the money that they need to win re-election. And I think that is a design, not a bug. I think that was that's how it was, where you have to play ball. You have to play ball in order to get elected, and that's why a lot of great candidates that are America First nationalists die on the vine, and that's too bad.
Yeah, and for those that don't know, at the federal level, at least, the largest of all special interest groups or lobbyists is AIPAC. I mean, I'm right in saying that, correct? It's the biggest.
If they're the biggest, and you've looked it up, then they're one of the biggest, obviously, with big time impact over foreign policy. So I look at it more like the defense industry. Defense contractors are really powerful. You've got even people on the right are powerful too. I think that and this is where I would side with some of the grassroots left on finance reforms, where if we don't get big money and big influence out of politics, we will have a government. Maybe in a very rare case, you'll get a president of the people if we can make some changes to the election problems. But lo and behold, I know way more people that have been elected to some position in the last 3 years that are no longer true than I do the opposite. I only know a handful of people who've been elected where I think that they're still strong and still true. So it's normally the opposite, where somebody that's solid gets elected and then they maybe not become outright corrupt, but they mold their way back into that system. And one of them, I'll just drop her name right here. Her name's Monet Johnson, and she is the Secretary of State of South Dakota. In 2022, I did an event out in the Black Hills, and we were talking about election corruption. I've alleged that I believe that there were fraudulent ballots in South Dakota in 2020 for Biden. And where there's smoke, there's fire. And the grassroots fighters down there in South Dakota, they believe that the cheating is happening in RV parks, thanks to voter registration. Now, North Dakota, right up north, doesn't have voter registration, and they don't have the same weird data that South Dakota spits out. So you've got extra registrations. You can match mail-in ballots to those, and then over a lengthy early voting period, you can harvest up the ballots, and you can tip local races. So I can tell you how many electoral votes or Senate seats probably got ripped off, but I can never tell you how many county commissioner seats got tipped or how many sheriff races got tipped. So South Dakota is this woman came to one of my events 2 years ago that I was talking about this kind of stuff, and she was a candidate for Secretary of State. Now, I've heard that a million times. I'm running for lieutenant governor. I'm running for Secretary of State, and it's a guy that nobody knows who he is, and he has the right heart, but he doesn't have money, which is important in politics. He doesn't have influence, doesn't have a big social media following. So if you can't get your face out there, then that's a big issue. And sure enough, she won the party's nomination at the convention. And then she wound up winning the general election in 2022 and immediately stopped talking with her election folks that got her where she was within 6 months of being there in 22 and 2023, and won't talk to me either. So an example of somebody who seemed like the real deal and believed all the right things, who now is a political person, a political creature.
Yeah, that's sad that happens. All right, here's what I want to do. Let's go through the appointee list so far. Some of these are cabinet members. Some of them are just nominated right now, but they're kind of Trump's pick. And let's try to spend 2 minutes or less where if you think it's the right pick, you say move on. If you think there's somebody else you wish you would have seen selected, let me know who that is and why, or if it's something, if you just want to pass on it, pass. But first and foremost, I'm going to say Peter Thiel and JD Vance, because we know that Thiel in a big way has funded and supported Vance's career. But so Vice President Vance, how you feeling?
So politically, a great choice. Politically, Trump. The point of the vice presidential pick, obviously, the function of the vice president once he's in office is there's really not that big of a scope. It's to replace the president if the president dies, or if the president is unable to serve, and also to preside over the Senate. Normally, what that means is to cast a tie-breaking vote in the event of a tie. So the VP role it's not a non-important job. It's a prominent job, but it's not as crazy busy and with as many duties as other roles. So politically, I think he was a fantastic choice. I think that he was textbook conservative enough to shore up a lot of these people that the ones that are really mad about the cabinet picks right now, especially the ones that are moored to ideology. I could care less about ideology. Ideology flows and comes and goes over the decades. As long as we have the rule of law and the Constitution that allows for our freedoms, for you and I to sit here and have this conversation and not fear the persecution that could come from having this conversation in North Korea, then we're okay, even if the people we don't like run the government, because their power over us is limited. So Vance is a textbook conservative. Textbook enough to where he's got ugly comments about Trump in his past. And I think that he did a good job in owning those comments. And I think that it's okay. A lot of us are really on the alert when we find people that are avowed Trump haters. The question is not, were they Trump haters? It's, are they Trump haters? Because if you don't have the ability to change people's minds, then you don't have a movement at all. You know what I'm saying here? So J.D. Vance is allowed to change his mind on Donald Trump.
Sure,
now,
absolutely.
The question is the change sincere? Because Mike Pence had positive things to say about Trump in 2016. He actually kept his mouth shut during the nomination process because he probably thought from the Midwest that Trump had a shot to win the nomination. And then, of course, Mike Pence turned out to be exactly who most people figured he was, which is a Republican professional politician, and who refused to make any tough calls on the certification of the 2020 election. That's up to debate about how much leeway he had to do, but he definitely could have done things to at least cause the certification to be delayed. So Vance politically was a fine pick. He's well liked. He's got a cultural vibe. Now, as far as practice, that remains to be seen, and that's the big if. Because vice presidents are typically not strong candidates in the following election. George Bush is the last one who's won, and that was in 1988, with a way decreased margin from Reagan, but that's normal for when a party's got 8 years in the White House. Al Gore lost, wasn't a particularly weak candidate. And then you can look at any of the other vice presidential candidates who have been chewed up in the nominating process. And Biden eventually got elected, but everybody knows about that 2020 election. But he also didn't go straight from being VP into being a presidential candidate. So VPs as presidential candidates are very much on the fence. I think that we're in the middle of a realignment. So if this is a great administration, Vance will be well positioned, especially since the Electoral College is very strongly favoring the Republican Party, especially if changes can be made. As far as connections, that's where you find the big concerns. I am not the expert at this, so Jonathan, who I connected you to, would be an excellent play on this one. The conservative treehouse, Sundance, is very skeptical about Vance. I am not the expert on digging those connections, but some of his connections are in the big tech, big money industries. So that is something that I would consider an intel gap. And I also would like to be mindful that I am hopeful that I think he's handled the media masterfully. He's been excellent to put out on TV. He claps when he needs to, and I hope I get a chance to work with him or anyone in his orbit on cleaning up elections in the next 4 years.
Okay, very good. Well, just keep in mind, I've got like 20 more names to list here.
That's fine.
With that being VP, and I understand you had more to say on him.
Well, so that's kind of a big one, He might,
it's a big one.
God forbid, but like he's one heartbeat away from the right job, and I hope that never happens.
So this is not a cabinet pick, but he's always kind of hovering around, and they say that he's very important in selecting these appointees along with Trump, and that's Jared Kushner. What do you got on him? And you can pass if you want to, if you don't have anything to say.
I think that from what I've heard, that Kushner's not expected to be part of the administration. Kushner got a lot of credit for drawing up the Trump pathway to 270 in 2016. Other than that, a lot of the picks that he brought in are not of the nationalist America First types.
Yeah, agreed.
So I'm once again, I'm at the mercy of who the president picks, but I have a feeling that he's not going to be part of the administration.
Okay. Well, the reason I brought him up was I've heard that he is a big part of the selection, like selecting these people that I'm about to name.
Mm-hmm.
So Susie Wiles, Chief of Staff. All right, let's step back in then. So Elise Stefanik, UN ambassador.
No, she's popular with a lot of the Trump base. I think that she has a bit of the war hawk in her, the neocon brand. I think that position is relatively harmless, just like Nikki Haley was. So a lot of these positions that people are upset about the pick, I think that Trump's strategy is they're not as crucial to his agenda, and here it's less harmful to have this person in this role.
How much, before we go on, how much of this, when it comes to the war hawk thing, in the Middle East, because they may not be all about Ukraine, but they definitely are about Israel. How much of it, or is it a combination of the lobbying, the AIPAC, the political games, and also just their Christian theology, would you say? I mean, it could depend person to person, maybe.
Well, some people, and I grew up with this mindset too. When I joined the Army ROTC, it was, if George W. says that it's good for us to be at war in the Middle East and spread, freedom to people. And another stupid 2004 mantra was, if we don't fight them over there, we'll be fighting them over here. Well, 20
They're
years
still
later,
saying it now.
Yeah, 20 years later, we're still fighting them over there, so we don't fight them over here. Meanwhile, we have no immigration procedures in place to stop them from just legally immigrating here or illegally immigrating here. So that what I mean by that is radical terrorists immigrating over here. So I think that some of that is just ingrained in what people have learned. You've done a lot of shows recently about theology, and I'm not into the rapture doctrine either. But if you're from the South, then it's like rapture, rapture, rapture. And I've been hearing that the last 25 years that every day is the last day. So, and here I am. I just turned 40 years old. At one time, I never thought I would have a career, get married, have kids. Then,
Yeah. And a lot of that is based on Israel being attacked. And so anytime there's a war over there, it's like, oh, this is prophecy. It's being fulfilled. We got to support them.
Correct. Yep. So a lot of it's ingrained in theology and political belief, and that's really unfortunate, especially when you think about we're not there and we're not winning anything. And having served, my views radically changed when I spent a year in Afghanistan, where we are not there to win the war. We have no objectives for winning that war. And by the way, the people that you're supposedly exporting all this freedom to are warlords fighting over piles of rocks that have been successful in repelling every first world nation from their country for hundreds of years.
It's unbelievable. Just
that's why they call Afghanistan the graveyard of empires.
Unreal. All right. So, admin of the EPA, Lee Zeldin.
I think that Zeldin will have policy on energy that's going to be aligned with where Trump's was. Western New York is not really big on energy like Western Pennsylvania is, but he did really well out there in his governor's race. So I think that he's going to be a good stamp on everything Trump produces.
Okay. National Security Advisor Mike Waltz.
I don't know a whole lot about Mike Waltz. You just got to be careful with understanding what his views are. I'm sure he was selected for a reason. One of them being he's from a safe congressional seat too. National security is something where if it's not an expeditionary foreign policy, this role isn't nearly as important as it would be under somebody like somebody like George Bush, who would be looking at that. So we've also created a lot of this apparatus, like with the DHS, since 9/11, which has been a loss of liberties for Americans net.
Director of CIA, John Ratcliffe. And before you answer on this one, there's been promises made about the JFK files, maybe not that strongly worded from Trump, but things like, I think I would release those, and I believe that if it's called the statute of limitations or whatever, it's coming up in terms of the time since the assassination happened where the documents can actually are supposed to be released to the public. that would, according to what I've heard, my sources, that it would fall in the hands of the director of the CIA to actually be the guy to release a file like that.
Well, I think that everybody needs to manage their expectations on this, and I don't like saying that. Now, as far as Ratcliffe being picked, he's been in this realm, in this bubble before. Most people seem to think he's a pretty solid choice for it. Now, as far as what they're supposed to be doing, now remember there's a policy. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but you can probably look it up. It's called intel oversight. And all intelligence professionals, including military intelligence. So, for anybody watching this show, military intelligence is not all spooks. You have grunts too. And down at the company and battalion levels, you have privates, sergeants, lieutenants, and captains whose job is to amass intelligence from the battlefield, actual tactical intelligence at the lowest level, put it together, make assessments on enemy activity, and brief the commander for his daily mission plans. So that's tactical intelligence. When you look at the CIA's job and all the other intelligence agencies, all intelligence agencies are bound by intelligence oversight, which is you are not allowed to collect on U.S. citizens unless X, Y, and Z conditions are met. So warranted, surveillance, that kind of stuff. So that's a big no-no, and it's stamped all over everything. So you can't collect on U.S. citizens unless otherwise permitted, and it's not easy to get a permission to do that. But you know that they do it anyway.
Oh yeah.
So right. So this is also when we get to Tulsi Gabbard. This is one of the reasons I'm very excited about her. So intel oversight is always violated. So just because there's rules, it doesn't mean that they're being followed. So the police know the rules too. And a lot of police, even in red states, were locking up soccer moms for having their kids at the playground during COVID. So rules, 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 and then what actually happens. So I'm not really so sure that 60-year-old documents pertaining to an event that shaped the modern world are just there waiting to be released. What are they going to do? What's going to happen? So if they're shredded and burned, what are we going to do? We're going to go back 50 years and find who burned them and issue a retroactive crime? I don't think so. But, whatever happens, it's going to be interesting. There will be truth that comes out no matter what. But Ratcliffe, as director of CIA, to me, the debate is not whether the organization should be reformed. It's whether it should exist.
I love that. That's a great answer. Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth. Now, before you go, this is one where I would like to see a guy like Douglas McGregor in that place.
I love Hegseth as SecDef. Love it, love it,
Okay.
love it, love it. And one of the things that I gauge these cabinet choices on is reaction from the political class and the media. Now, this is also a double-edged sword because you can't. I'd love for Kid Rock to be Secretary of State, and I'd love for him to fly in to Switzerland, land to you never met an MFer quite like me. Get off, run down to the yacht club, stone cold stunner every bureaucrat there, drink a beer, get back on the plane and leave. But he needs 51 votes in the Senate. So this is the problem that we have, is that we are bound by reality. So when you look at Pete Hegseth, he's got opposition. Now, I hope that this isn't enough opposition to drop his nomination, which it may be. It's very possible. But one thing I like about him is he's not a general. And I don't have anything against generals just because they're generals. But most generals are, selected from the cocktail class that are going to say yes, sir, and do what they're told because their confirmations rely on what the United States Senate does. So they're all confirmed by the Senate. That doesn't mean they're all bad, but most of them are going to kiss ass to get where they need to be. And even ones that we thought were good, General Mattis, General Kelly, all those guys are now establishment puppets, and they've come out and endorsed Kamala Harris, who has zero qualifications to be the president, let alone the commander-in-chief. It's embarrassingly bad. So when you look at somebody like Pete Hegseth, he didn't have a high rank. He is a veteran, a young guy. He's very imperfect personally, which who is not? That's something that's always frustrated me about evangelicals, is they're so judgmental when it comes to folks like this. It's like, look, he's got stuff in his past, in his personal life that sucks, but like, if you're divorced and you had problems, you did the wrong thing, or you're not eligible to fix the problem in your country, read your Bible. Okay, so Pete Hegseth is probably brought on to battle the wokeism in the military ranks. So just like after Vietnam, which was a stupid war, Vietnam brought about a lot of drug culture in the military. and it really caused problems with readiness. So regardless of if you like our foreign policy or not, the military readiness is important in the event that we have to fight a real war where we get invaded, or we have to use the military for a good purpose. So the military readiness is critical. And one of the things that holds it back the most is wokeism, allowing people that are not fit to be in the military, making it a giant social experiment. That has to stop. My guess is he wouldn't have earned the nomination if he was a bloodthirsty general or a John McCain type that wanted to go to war. So I think that probably speaks for itself. But I think that he's definitely outsider enough. Just because you're on Fox News doesn't mean you're an insider. And I think that he's a fresh face. I think he's a fantastic choice. And I think for anybody that has an issue with other cabinet choices, they're ignoring a lot of good ones, and Pete is one of the good ones.
Okay. You mentioned that's the first time you've brought up that somebody ultimately has to be confirmed by the Senate. I've learned about recess appointments recently, and that is something that Trump had, thrown out there. Can you explain that part of it real quick? Like, why can't we just do these recess appointments?
Well, so I don't know the political procedures for doing that. It sounds like the Speaker of the House or the Vice President, somehow there's a mechanism to adjourn the houses of Congress, so the Senate and the House.
Yeah, it would be through Mike Johnson. He would call the recess.
Right. So is Johnson willing to do that? I don't know, because Johnson's been very hit or miss on since he's been in the speakership. So and most people would say bad, but I also give him a little bit of grace having a very narrow majority. So it's not. I have a reservoir of things I tolerate for political things, and then things I don't. So I don't know if that'll happen, but it's certainly been talked about. I think that may be a break glass in case of emergency thing. If it becomes evident we're going to shoot down every one of your picks unless it's who we want. And that's also probably one of the main reasons why there are some establishment picks that are out there.
Okay. What about next is Secretary of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem.
DHS is new. We came up under Bush. It's pervasive. It has way too much scope behind it. South Dakota grassroots doesn't like Kristi Noem. National conservative movement does. She did endorse Trump early. I think she was maybe in the run for trying to hunt for vice president, which she wasn't from a key region of the country that Trump needed her for. It's an average pick. I'd say it's an okay pick. It depends on what leeway she has, how long Trump's leash is. I think that she probably will comply with Trump's expectations for the DHS, which is what I think would be to reduce it, especially when we look at the DOGE.
Okay, hope so. Border czar Todd Holman.
Tom Holman.
Tom, yes.
Number one, outstanding choice.
That's what I was thinking.
So, here's the big reason why is he doesn't have to be confirmed by the Senate. So he's already in. So even if Trump didn't get any of his picks confirmed, especially the good picks, Tom Holman is there as border czar. He doesn't need to be confirmed. And when people look back at 3 elections of Donald Trump, the most swag, the most talked about, the most merched thing that Trump has ever had is building walls, getting rid of illegal aliens. And that is the hallmark of Donald J. Trump. I'm going to build a wall. I am going to have the largest deportation operation ever seen. Well, that is already good to go. So, Tom Holman appears to be about as cold as it gets, and you have to have that. And I've seen him on numerous shows talking about, well, what about separating families? Families can be deported together. Right. So obviously a lot can happen. When somebody takes office, if somebody sticks with their guns, they're going to be resisted by blue state mayors, which I hope they get arrested. And I think that there's sabers that are rattling. Now, eventually American history changes and something radical does happen. So why not now? But Holman is fantastic for that job. And that's something that every Trump person who's frustrated with the picks ought to be really happy about.
Excited about. Now, will he answer, though, to Kristi Noem if she's confirmed?
I don't know.
Okay. Secretary of State, Marco Rubio.
Okay pick. I think that it was picked for a reason. He could have picked anybody before the Senate nominations wound up. Like, hey, we're not going to do Matt Gaetz. Right. So he could have chosen anybody. He went after Rubio pretty quick. There could be a little bit of maneuvering here to position various people in certain Senate seats, maybe Laura Trump But I think that the Secretary of State role, the Secretary of State is the lead foreign diplomat of the United States. So Trump's foreign policy is probably centered mostly around trade at this point. I don't think it's going to be about military alliances unless a world war breaks out in the next 4 years. But Trump's Secretary of State is just maintaining relationships with other nations. Rubio is going to be less engaged with going over military issues than most Secretary of States maybe in the past. But then again, remember, every one of the picks serves at the pleasure of the United States. And Rubio has been much better in the last 4 or 6 years than he was when he first ran against Donald Trump.
Okay. Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard.
Fantastic. And this is me in the post-ideological world, right? I'm no longer as blue and red as I was. And that doesn't mean my personal ideology, I'm further right than almost anyone you'll meet. But ultimately, I'm a nationalist. So what I do support about Tulsi Gabbard, so I don't agree with her on her left-wing policies, any of her views that are Democrat views, that are collectivist views.
Well, but what would you say are the biggest ones of those that she's carried over? Because people are so just excited that she's moved to the right and supports Trump that they forget who she used to be.
Well, I mean, she's been tied up with some of the people like these young leaders, these Council of Foreign Leaders. I think one of those. She had a lot of the typical collectivist platforms that are standard with Democrats. So the specific examples, I wrote an article about this a couple of years ago. I'd have to reference, but she is a veteran. She has been critical of the foreign wars and was when she ran for president in 2020. She single-handedly destroyed Harris's presidential campaign in one fell swoop.
I remember that. Yeah.
Which was brilliant. But the reason that she's in the DNI, so the DNI, the Director of National Intelligence, oversees 18 intelligence agencies. Now, the first thing that anybody should be eyes open about is, why do we have 18 intelligence agencies? 18 agencies.
Crazy. Yeah.
All right. So before you get too crazy about it, everybody's got to have intelligence. That's just the modern world. You have to have the ability to know what the enemy is doing. Our problem is we think everybody's the enemy and we're the hammer. So this is all about reform. Military units will always have intelligence, and they have since they've thrown sticks and stones at one another. But the DNI oversees the activities of 18 intelligence agencies, including their budgets, including their overall mission. And Gabbard is a known privacy hawk. So she is anti-surveillance, and I think that one of her main goals is going to be ensuring that the people have protection from the government illegally spying on their activities, which the government has an interest in doing, and that's why they use the IRS to go after their political opponents. So when they find out that this group is somebody that wants to reform this and this, which is the sacred cow of keeping this establishment together, then the government persecutes that group. That stuff is probably going to happen if Gabbard gets confirmed, where it's going to be peeled back. So I think that she's another fulfillment of Trump's promises to do things differently.
Excellent. Secretary of Health and Human Services, RFK Jr.
I'm pleased with this pick. And one of the reasons I'm pleased with it is less about the execution of his duties as I am that Trump honored his coalition with. So, usually when people want to boo bird an incoming administration or a political leader, they want to say, well, so-and-so betrayed so-and-so. Kennedy betrayed Trump betrayed all the Kennedy people that decided to vote for him in Michigan and Pennsylvania. Well, Trump didn't do that. Trump nominated Kennedy for HHS. I think he's going to get through. I think that it's going to help if he does make changes in the next 4 years, which drastically improve living in America. Just look around, Jeremy. You're a professional athlete, and I'm not, but I was an Army officer. So you and I come from cultures where you have to be physically fit. But when you go to Walmart these days, or you go to any store, I mean, there's no shortage of people that are critically unhealthy. And one of the key factors in dying from COVID was weighing 400 pounds. So I think that big pharma, this is an area where, like, look at Tulsi, where I've gone a little bit, no, I wouldn't call it left. That's a stupid way to describe it. But I do believe in some green reforms. I'm not in support of landfills everywhere. I'm not in support of poison in the aisles of the grocery store. I'm not in support of big pharma destroying real health care in this country. So if RFK is going to go through and eliminate the poisons, just go look at the nutritional values of foods in Europe. If you've ever traveled over in Europe, they make fries completely differently in Europe than they do here in the United States.
Yeah.
So that's a major factor. The government making Americans sick can then saddle them with government solutions to supposedly make them better and entrench themselves. So I think RFK is a great pick. I think it should please a lot of people who wonder where Trump's loyalties are, which I don't, but some people do. And if you're skeptical, that's fine. But RFK is an honoring of a coalition and a pact that was made. It shows a lot of bigness from Trump because RFK has been very critical of Trump in recent years. And I think that if we're going to ever fix the country, you'll have to have people that don't agree with each other coming together where they can.
Yep, that's right. I'm going to skip a couple here to get to some of the bigger names. Howard Lutnick, Secretary of Commerce.
Don't know enough to go through that
That's
one.
fine.
But I haven't heard a lot of complaining about that one.
Secretary of Education, Linda McMahon.
Fine with it. She's been a stalwart supporter of Trump's, and I think that she sees the issues with the current system. And as long as we make more freedom there, school choice would be a big thing. But I'm okay with Linda McMahon.
Okay. AG, Pam Bondi.
I'm in the middle on that one. I've read the same voices, conservative treehouse being one of them, that are not excited about the pick. Trump picked Gates. Gates is the only candidate that has folded, and he folded quick. And he wasn't that far off the mark. He only had 4 people against him. So I believe that it's very possible Gates was a lightning rod to collect information on who is going to be a hard vote, because Gates was the most polarizing of all these nominees, even more so than Pete Hegseth. I think that Gates is going to wind up as a special counsel for something. But Bondi, so on her positives, she's very, very loyal to Trump. Now, she was a Jeb Bush person in 2016 Yep. before Trump was the nominee. I don't have an issue with that. She was from Florida. Jeb's got issues, obviously, Bush family, but that's fairly expected. Given that you're going to assume an elected AG is going to endorse somebody from her state.
This is another one of those that taps into the heart of like the MAGA movement, the Reawaken America Tour movement, when it comes to things like Epstein's client list. That would probably fall in her lap to actually do a real release of something like that. Am I right or wrong?
Probably, but I will tell you that she has very, very long, even when she's been mixed up in Florida politics, Florida Republican politics, she's been very vocal about how she feels about illegal immigration. Keep in mind, Florida does not have a land border with another country. So this is not really empty talk. She doesn't even have to make that much of a position about it, because Florida's illegals are people that are overstaying visas. I suppose they've come down from other places. But Texas, when you talk illegal immigration in Texas and Arizona, you also got to talk about borders and deal with the federal government not protecting borders. So she's been vocal about illegal immigration, talking about throwing people out. She's been vocal about election fraud. And she defended Trump during one of his impeachments, and she also criticized and chastised the states that were cheating in 2020, and said that Pennsylvania was disenfranchising citizens with their votes. So it's easy for people to come around now and talk about election cheating, especially now that it happened in real time in the 2024 election and the courts had to get involved. But I'm hopeful on those accounts that she's a Trump loyalist, even if she has political ties. She is somebody that I would probably work in the orbit of if I were to be part of any election reform. So there's at least some good sound bites out there that she may do that. Okay. And she will get confirmed. And that's another thing, is if you don't like the pick, Trump's got 48 months in the White House. How many of those months do you want spent stalled up with cabinet picks?
That's another question. If he decides, 6 months in, a year in, to drop someone, does it still have to be confirmed again by his new pick by the Senate?
No, he will drop people. He did last time. It was equal chairs, and I think some people realize that. And I don't think it's always an insult. I think it's like you got a long reliever, you got a closer, you got a guy that's coming in to pitch the first 4 innings. So I think that any of those positions would still have to be confirmed.
Okay. Was there any reason when I brought up Epstein client list, you didn't really answer that? You talked more about the election fraud stuff?
Well, I think that she would be responsible for that. I just don't know enough about the politics of what's on the Epstein client list, why it's not been released. But yeah, it would have to be something that's attached to a much bigger investigation that would elicit something like that coming out.
Yeah, and the reason that matters is I think the majority of people that stand where we stand politically think that would be a big part of outing deep state actors that have really, evil things in their past that we could get rid of through something like that coming out.
Well, Gates alluded to that on Twitter the other day when he talked about special counsels, when it was being discussed about special counsels for exposing the government corruption. So and he also was supportive of Bondi's nomination. So my guess is Gates was a lightning rod, and to collect information, and Bondi was a contingent choice.
Okay. Secretary of Treasury Scott Bessent.
Well, he's got some ties that people have exposed on the internet. Well, I don't know if they've exposed them. They've pointed them out. It's not that hard to find.
He spent like a decade working under a Soros hedge fund management. Right.
Correct. So once again, it's not what you did, it's what you currently believe and do. That was so easily found. I found it in the first 1 minute when looking this guy up. So people that think that Trump's team doesn't know about these ties, like that's just silly. So my guess is that he's got some insider knowledge to do this. I'm not a big understanding guy of U.S. Treasury politics, but I do know that we don't have sound money in this country.
What I've heard is that the crypto crowd on the right and the left love this guy, and they think he's awesome.
Well, then that's why he was picked, because Trump made a big plea for crypto folks in this race. The Libertarian Front really liked Trump for that.
Does it affect you at all with your Christian values or anything that he's openly gay?
No. His job is to run the U.S. Treasury. I had to be in the military with people that had all different religious views and backgrounds and sexual orientations. So I think that conversation enters more into Secretary of Education, about traditional values and whatnot. But no, I want him to run the Treasury well. And I would say the same thing about Pete Hegseth. People that want to talk about his personal issues or divorces. I mean, well, I'm divorced. Does that mean that I can't serve in any capacity? So a lot of people need to remember the scriptural wisdom of straining gnats and swallowing camels, or finding the speck in your brother's eye before they worry about who's fit for government duties.
All right. Secretary of HUD, Scott Turner.
Don't have much of an opinion on this one. The big concern with HUD is that the deliberate dumping of low rent areas and high rise apartments and projects don't keep pushing into suburban counties. That was a big Obama era push to blue out the suburban areas, and that's why Atlanta has the problems it has.
I remember I was in Atlanta at the time. I remember it firsthand. Let's see. Surgeon General. This has been a big one in the news, like today, mostly. Jeanette Neshawat. If that's how you say it.
I think so. I've seen the chaff on this one. This is a big time overreaction by a lot of people. So once again, 48 months as president, and you're going to have 2 months where the presidency is a slow roll to get all these people confirmed, and you're getting your initial executive orders out there. You're dealing with leakers. You're going to deal with press problems. There will probably, in the first 60 or 90 days of the Trump administration, be some, the first big problem. Like, I'm not saying it's going to be a scandal, but it's going to divert attention. So let's just say that you got 3 months on the front end that are going to slow roll. And then you're going to have, starting in about June of 2028, the election season will be upon us, even though a year before that, people will be debating for president. But somebody will be nominated, or the apparent nominee, by June of 2028. And then you're going to have the next 7 months will be elections plus transition, hopefully to Trump's successor. But you've got 10 months already out of 48 that are shoulders. So we've only got about 3 years of presidency to get stuff done. So how long do you want the Senate arguing about the Attorney General or the Surgeon General, or do you want her to just get rubber stamped and put out? Because her duties are, she reports to the National Institute of Health, number one. Number two, she has warnings on cigarette packs, and she is a voice for, let's say that you had like COVID. Remember Jerome Adams in 2020? Hey, we've got a disease. Make sure you do this. Wash your hands. Do this and that and that. Right? That's the Surgeon General. It's a public face. So we have a lot of people that are getting upset about her name appearing on cigarette packs when she's not going to impact policy. And remember, she serves for President Trump. Just because she had a view on COVID, it's a past tense. I've seen a recent interview with her where she moderated these positions a little bit. COVID politics is a giant mess. I do not have any of the COVID shots, but I have a lot of shots that are probably as bad as the COVID shot because I was in the Army, and they stick you with every freaking thing under the sun, and it was way before things were political. So with the shots, 85% of America, and it's not a vaccine, it doesn't prevent transmission of the virus, but the COVID shot, 85% of Americans have at least one dose, including every active service member, including most professional athletes. So for 15% of the country to think that we have all of it figured out
Yeah.
is a bit of a miss, and politically it's just a non-starter, even if we're right.
I can hear
So
I can understand what you're saying and even agree with you that maybe she doesn't really have any real power and it's more of just a public face. Let's just move on. But at the same time, it's like this is a woman who was, and you said she moderated her positions a little bit, but she wouldn't even make my short list if I was Trump because she was pushing for pregnant women to get these shots. She was pushing for double masks. I mean, I've seen all those interviews too. And unless it's like a complete about face where she says, I was wrong. and now I'm ready to, move forward in a completely another direction. So I would have a disagreement with you on this one, even if it is just a public face, because just the symbol of it.
no, and I understand that, and in a perfect world, I would probably agree with you. I think my mind is so geared towards we have a finite period of time, and hey, that's not the best pick, but honestly, it doesn't matter that much. But like CDC Director Weldon, he's an excellent pick. People are really excited about him. RFK's a good pick, and they're all skeptical about vaccines. So
True.
two out of three ain't bad. I think that the difference between you and I is that I weight things on priority, and relative. Like almost every evaluation I've ever made is relative to something else. When people ask me who's the best president, it's always relative. Who's the best president in this era of history? Who's the best ball player in the dead ball era? Like I never go all time. So relative. I think that the positions that are most important to Trump's agenda are being filled by solid choices.
Okay. Last one is, and this is just because we've been talking about Middle East, Ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee.
As far as stated belief and what he's been like for his whole life, I think he's probably the ideal pick for that role. I think that all ambassadorships to a degree matter, but Huckabee fits the mold for your old school Republican Party there.
I saw a recent interview with him. I don't know if you saw it or not, where they said, what do you think about what's going on in the West Bank and in Gaza? He said, those are two terms I don't use. It's Judea and Samaria. This is Israel's land. And that's where he left it. So you, with your military experience and all this, I know that if you're an ambassador to a country, it helps if you like the country, but this is a country that has a lot of complexities that, from what I've seen, you probably didn't see the same interview, he's not even willing to acknowledge.
Yeah, it's certainly not a harbinger that we have peace on the horizon. Trump obviously wanted to bring peace to the region. I don't know what went into making the pick. I don't know who was most influential in pulling that. Once again, everyone in these positions serves at the pleasure of the President of the United States. And I do feel optimistic about the direction of the military if we get a Hegseth in there, and also with some of the internal changes to the agency. So that's a bit of a mixed bag on that.
Sure. So with all of that, if you had to give it a grade, and you can go minus or plus on these, but A through F, where would you give it as a whole for this period of time, these first elections?
Well, all right. So we want an A plus. We would like everybody in our position that we want our guy, America first, all the way. So working our way down from A plus. The reason we don't have A plus is because we have 53 Republican senators, and two of them are Lisa Murkowski and Susan Collins. Susan Collins is from Maine, and of course she's running for re-election. And Maine, she is about the only Republican that could be elected to the U.S. Senate from Maine, and I hate that. I hate that about our politics. Lisa Murkowski doesn't need to be reelected until 2028. And she is just a thorn in the side, and she's doing everything to be spiteful and appear way more important than she is. John Curtis from Utah replaced Mitt Romney. He's just as bad as Romney. And the Utah Republican Party continues to be a real problem for the GOP. And then we have Mitch McConnell. So those were the four that were against Matt Gaetz for AG. McConnell is somewhat a proceduralist and a traditionalist on this stuff, but he's also a major player within the bureaucracy. Mm-hmm. So anybody that people don't get through, Mitch will oppose. And that's also why his wife was approved as transportation secretary last time around, probably as a deal with him. So really, I think that the confirmations that Trump is going to get for his key cabinet, I think that could be some deal making here, where I'll give you this guy for this position as long as I get my pick for X or Y. So I would work my way down from A plus. And then I would give him a relative grade for, you only have 53 votes in the Senate and they're not all going to be on your favor. I'd say that we have a solid cabinet lined up, all things considered. I'd say we got a B out there. But I also think that it shows you, if you got a good strikeout pitcher on the mound, you don't have to worry about your defense as much. So it's a sliding scale. You got a ground ball pitcher, you better have the best infield you got, which also means what? You're not going to have the best 8 bats in the lineup or 9 bats in the lineup because you got your little slick fielding shortstop there from Venezuela rather than your Troy Glaus sized utility man that bumped over, played third, moved third baseman over
Sure.
short. So I think that the picks are enough for people to stop giving themselves aneurysms over based in the reality. And it also echoes the point that I'm making is why election integrity is so critical, because if elections were fair and we had a strict set of rules, then we wouldn't have 53 Senate seats. We'd have 56 or 57 Senate seats, and all of Trump's ideal picks would be confirmed.
Any final points you want to make, Seth? I know I've kept you longer than the time. I've got a lot I'd like to ask you about the future of America and how you see things going in 2028, but maybe we can save that for the next interview. But any final points you want to make, and also tell us where to find you.
So my Substack is right there on your screen, skeshel.substack.com. I post on True Social and Twitter. I'm probably going to scale back my push social media on True Social and Twitter. I'm not going to get off it, but I've spent way too much time on it. I'm trying to reset a lot of things in my own life now, and I'm going to continue to feed my Substack, which has been excellent for me. It's helped me to stay independent in this battle. And I would like to be part of reforming elections, but I'm also going to give God his say in my life. So if that's not where he's going to have me, then I won't be there. I think that we've got a really good opportunity to be part of something great, and it doesn't hinge on politics. I think that we're living through a fourth turning. I think that your audience should read The Fourth Turning by Howe and Strauss, the original book that came out in the 90s, and you will find that we are at the end of a climax period in American history. So I think that a lot of things we think we know, how's it going to go in 2028? Well, I think that the answer is being written right now. And I don't know that it's going to align with all your traditional beliefs and views. Politically, the country is very rapidly aligning with us, with people that believe America exists for America. That it doesn't mean we need to be enemies with other countries, but it doesn't mean that we need to be at the behest of other countries either. So people are aligning with why can't we put all this money in America? So every time $96 billion goes overseas to other countries, then you have a lot of people who are like, man, I've got a college degree and I'm only making this much money and I can't afford a house. I can't get a loan for this. Like I can't afford basic necessities. Like, but why is that country getting $96 billion? So, I think that we've really got, a lot of things are positive for us, but everything is, this is when I would expect the most change because it's a dark time. It's a very dark time. I think that Trump definitely is where he's supposed to be from a theological perspective. I think that he belongs where he is, and I think that he's supposed to be there as a lighthouse in very turbulent water.
Yeah, well, I always appreciate your attitude, and I know recently you wrote a note from your father where he talked about attitude equals your altitude in your life. So I appreciate you helping to lift people up, because there is a lot of infighting. I think some of it is for good reason, but a lot of it can be for bad reason, because it's easier just to say, I'm tired of being let down, so I'm just going to go black-pilled and everything is bad. And that can never be the answer.
Well, my dad led soldiers in combat in Vietnam. He was in the infantry. I did not lead combat troops. Now, I served in combat, but I was an intelligence officer. So I had soldiers, and we produced intelligence materials. But if the leaders are downcast and downtrodden, you can find the same thing in sports. You find these clubhouses that have chemistry, and then you have clubhouses where they carry around defeat, and what happens is the players then buy into their own future. Where am I going to leave this team to go to somewhere else? And basically they leave the product on the field, and that shows when you don't run out the next ground ball, you don't give it all on the fly ball in the gap, and that's why you lose. But there are 100 million or more people in this country that know what's going on, and that's bigger than just votes. there's a lot of people that see the corruption here. We have a lot of talent in our country. We did a lot of things, and we have a lot of bad things in our past. I'm not going to sit here and say that everything we do is great. Nothing is great. So people need to ground themselves in reality. Reality is that humans are imperfect. Humans sin. Humans are fallen creatures short of salvation. And when you look at things through that lens, and that all can be restored, then you understand you have a role to play. You can't just sit here and accept decline once you awaken. And that's really what people mean when they red pill, because once you take it, you don't go back to the same thoughts. So when I'm telling you that I'm watching a map of all these Latino counties that haven't voted for a Republican presidential candidate in 100 years turn around and vote for Donald Trump, that is lasting change. That doesn't just happen. Like this is a cultural change through all of our classes in America. And if we don't have leaders that are willing to remain positive but also realistic. So am I positive about the cabinets? I'm mostly positive about the cabinets. Do I like all the picks? No, I don't. But the realism means you aren't going to get everything you want, because here's the constraints of where they are. So that means that you either take nothing or you take the absolute best case scenario. So as much as you want to hit a home run off of this guy, the way that your swing comes through the hitting zone and the way his pitches cross the plate, the best you may be able to handle is a base hit the other way, and that's all right.
I'll take that. Seth Keshel, that's a great way to end it, man. It's always a pleasure. Thanks for coming on, brother.
You bet, Jeremy. Thanks for having me on.